She sold our house while I was burying my brother. I came home from Joe's funeral still wearing my black suit, hands stiff from gripping the shovel at the gravesite, only to find the for sale sign gone from the yard and a metal lockbox bolted to the front door. No warning. No note. Just gone. I thought maybe I was in the wrong driveway. But no, the azaleas I'd planted along the walkway were still there, the porch swing still hanging where we carved our initials the summer we moved in. Only now it looked like a prop in somebody else's life. A guy in khakis came walking up the path with a clipboard. "You Robert Hayes?" he asked. "I live here," I said. He frowned politely. "Sir, the deed's been transferred. New ownership as of Monday. I'm just here to do a property inspection." His words hit harder than the preachers at the gravesite. Monday. That was the day I stood over Joe's casket in Brunswick. While I was lowering my brother into the ground, my ex-wife was across town, signing away everything we built. "My name's Robert Hayes. I'm 55, a carpenter in Savannah, Georgia. I've built more porches than I can count. Every morning I wake up before sunrise, smell the air, and can tell you if it's going to rain just by the way the wood in my shop swells. My life was simple. Predictable. And I thought my marriage was too. Margie and I were married 21 years. No kids. Not for lack of trying, that's one wound that never healed. She worked as a bookkeeper at a dentist's office, always sharp with numbers, always had some new budgeting system taped to the fridge with color-coded highlighters. I liked that about her once. She liked that I worked with my hands. Said it made her feel grounded. But somewhere along the way, we stopped being a we. She lived in her corner of the house, listening to finance podcasts and sipping green smoothies. I lived in the garage, building rocking chairs for neighbors and fixing their window frames. We still said, "I love you," out of habit, still did Sunday breakfast together. I figured that's what marriage turned into after 2 decades, not fireworks, just quiet comfort. I never imagined she'd blindside me like this. Looking back, the signs were there. First, she started calling it simplifying, separating accounts, to make taxes easier. Then she volunteered to handle the property tax and insurance bills. "You've done it forever," she said one morning, not even looking up from her coffee. "Let me take something off your plate." It felt like help. Now I know it was control. Even when Joe got sick, she was distant. I remember telling her one night the doctors had given him maybe a month. She didn't even pause the spreadsheet she was filling out. Just said, "Well, that's life, I guess," and clicked the next cell. I should have seen then what kind of person she'd become. The hammer blow came at the county clerk's office. I'd gone down there for a simple errand, get a copy of the property tax statement for my accountant. Nothing dramatic. The clerk, a young woman with a nose ring and a soft voice, pulled up my file and tilted her head. "Oh, huh. Looks like ownership was recently transferred," she said, tapping the keyboard. "Do you want me to print the updated deed for you?" "Updated deed?" My throat was already dry. She nodded, clicked once more, and slid the paper across the counter. There it was. My name, crossed out. Replaced by someone I didn't know. Signed by Margaret E. Hayes. And next to her name? My signature. Except it wasn't mine. You ever see your own name forged? It's like looking at your face in a cracked mirror. It's meant to resemble you, but everything's off, the tilt, the slant, the weight of the strokes. Hollow. I stared at that paper until my knuckles went white. My ears rang. The clerk asked if I was okay, and I realized I'd crumpled the deed in my fist. I handed it back before I tore it in half. Margie had sold our house. Forged my signature. Had it notarized. And done it while I was standing over my brother's casket. I stumbled outside into the parking lot. Called her 3 times. No answer. Texted her. Me, you sold the house. Without me. Without a word. Why? Hours later, she replied. Margie, Robert. We've been separated for years. You said you'd let me handle the legal stuff while you were dealing with Joe. I didn't think you'd care this much. I'm sorry if you feel blindsided. I had to make a decision. I read that text under the parking lot lights until the words blurred. If you feel blindsided. As if I was being unreasonable for caring about the home I built with my own 2 hands. That night I slept in a roadside motel on the west side of town, staring at the cracked ceiling. Everything I thought I'd built, the marriage, the home, the life I planned to retire in, felt like it had been hollowed out from underneath me. Like a porch you think is solid until you hear the beam snap. I replayed every moment. Every bill I let her file away. Every time she said, "Don't worry about it, I've got it handled." I'd been so consumed with trying to keep my brother alive, I never realized she was slipping out the back door with everything we owned. The next morning, I parked across the street from what used to be my house. Watched as a young couple stepped out the front door, the new owners, I guessed. She had a paint swatch booklet. He carried a level under his arm. They looked happy. They didn't know they were standing in my life. I didn't confront them. Didn't shout. It wasn't their fault. They bought a home in good faith, not knowing the deed they got was built on a lie. But I took a photo of the lockbox. Noted the title transfer date. Then I drove away, back to my small rented apartment. Sat at the kitchen table staring at the carved initials on a piece of scrap wood I'd kept from the porch swing. It used to make me proud. Now it burned in my hand. That night, I did what I do best, I started building. Not furniture. Not porches. A plan. I didn't go to the retirement party. I parked my truck 2 blocks away, windows cracked just enough to catch the faint rhythm of laughter and music spilling out of the shop. Through the windshield, I could see my crew moving around the barbecue pit, clapping shoulders, holding up cups. They'd set the tables with checkered cloths, hung a banner that read, "Thank you, Robert," in thick black letters. For years I'd pictured that send-off, the one you earn after decades of sweat. But instead of walking in, shaking hands, and accepting the plaque they probably had waiting for me, I sat in my truck listening to my name drift out of the open bay doors, fragments of memories and stories being told without me. It didn't sting the way I expected. It clarified something. You can't sharpen a blade while people are watching. I pulled away before anyone noticed. Deleted the texts from Kenny asking where I was. Deleted my Facebook account that night. Let my phone go dark. On paper, it looked like retreat. Like I'd been beaten. But it wasn't surrender. It was quiet. And quiet was where I did my best work. Margie, meanwhile, wasn't quiet at all. She flourished. Photos started popping up in the local Chamber of Commerce newsletter, Margie in linen suits, hair newly cut to shoulder length, a man beside her in almost every shot, his arm draped lightly at her back. They were smiling on a yacht in one, handing out raffle tickets at a fundraiser in another. In an interview with the neighborhood magazine about local women reinventing themselves after 50, she said, "I've spent so much of my life carrying other people's burdens. It feels good to finally breathe." I read that line twice sitting in my apartment over a used bookstore, chili in a paper cup because I hadn't unpacked my dishes yet. I'd built her kitchen cabinets from reclaimed maple. I'd dug the holes for her gardenias. I'd stood at my brother's grave while she forged my name on the deed. And now she was the one, finally breathing. It wasn't just public reinvention. She was petty too. A friend from church called me one morning and said, "Robert, did you know Margie's been telling people you gave her the house as an apology for not having kids?" He sounded embarrassed to even repeat it. I said thank you, hung up, and stared at the wall until the sound of the bookstore door chime downstairs snapped me out of it. That was when I decided my silence wasn't going to be self-pity. It was going to be cover. I started walking everywhere, not because I needed exercise, but because it gave me time to think. My apartment was only a few blocks from the courthouse, so I went there almost every afternoon, sitting at long tables under buzzing fluorescent lights, flipping through title records. The clerk stopped asking what I was doing after the first week. I'd say, helping my cousin with a land dispute, and they'd point me to the shelves. People always talk more when they think you're harmless. One afternoon, I pulled the notary log for the date my signature had supposedly been witnessed. My heart was thudding so hard I thought the receptionist would hear it. The building was quiet, just the scratch of pens on paper from a couple of people filling out forms. I found the name of the notary, a stamp number, a witness signature. But the time listed didn't match the transaction record on file. It was a rookie mistake. Someone had forged not only my signature but the timing too. As I took a photo of the log with my phone, a clerk walked by and glanced at me. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice neutral but curious. I slipped my phone back in my pocket like a teenager caught texting in class. "Yes, ma'am. Just waiting for someone," I said, forcing a smile. She gave me a small nod and moved on. My pulse didn't slow until I was back out on the sidewalk, leaning against the courthouse column. That was the first moment I felt it, not just betrayal, but leverage. I didn't tell anyone yet. Not Kenny, not my old neighbors. I wanted to see how far Margie would go. She thought I was hiding. She thought I was licking my wounds somewhere, too tired to do anything but disappear. And I wanted her to keep thinking that. I did, however, start changing myself in ways that would seem invisible to her. I went to a second-hand shop and bought a blazer that actually fit. Cut my hair. Shaved the beard. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. He looked like someone who could walk into an office and not be dismissed as a carpenter with a grievance. He looked like someone who could hold his own in a room full of notaries, registrars, and attorneys. Kenny ran into me at Forsyth Park one Sunday afternoon while walking his dog. "You ghosting everybody now, Hayes?" he said, half joking. I gave him a small smile. "I'm just taking some time." He squatted to scratch the dog's ears. "You know, I saw Margie at the Rotary Club. Said something about finally moving on. Smiled like someone who just traded in an old truck for a new one." I kept my gaze on the fountain. "You really done with all that?" he asked softly. I paused, then said, "Some things fix themselves. Others need help." He didn't press. Just nodded, like he'd been waiting to hear me say something like that. At night, back in my apartment, I pulled out the one piece of the porch swing I'd saved, a broken plank I'd yanked off before leaving the house. The initials we carved together were still faintly visible. I sanded them off. Then I carved something new on the back. She buried the truth. I'm digging it back up. It wasn't meant for her. It was meant for me. The more I learned, the clearer it became. Margie hadn't just acted impulsively. She'd planned. Durable power of attorney signed the previous spring. Notary she knew through her new boyfriend. Witness signature from one of his colleagues. Every step hidden under layers of convenience. She'd built herself a paper trail while I was busy burying Joe. But I was building one now too, only mine pointed the other way. The last time I saw her before things shifted, she was outside a bakery downtown, white coffee cup in hand, laughing with the same man from the yacht photos. His hand at the small of her back looked like it had been there a while. I stayed across the street, in the shadows of a brick building. She didn't see me. She tossed her head back, laughing at something he said. Her sunglasses caught the sunlight. She looked untouchable, like someone who'd gotten away clean. I reached into my pocket and touched the edge of the photograph I'd taken of the notary log. My thumb pressed against the timestamp that didn't match. Before she got into the car, I whispered, "Enjoy it while it lasts." She thought I meant the sunshine. She had no idea I meant everything. It started with a voicemail I wasn't supposed to get. I was sitting in the back of the bookstore cafe under my apartment, sipping bad coffee and marking up another stack of title documents when my phone buzzed twice and went quiet. I didn't recognize the number, and normally I'd have let it go, but something about the Georgia area code made me hit play. A woman's voice came through, bright, efficient, a little too practiced. "Hi Robert, just confirming we're still all set for tomorrow's appointment at 10. I've got the closing packet. Margie said you'd be bringing your ID for signature. We'll get everything notarized quickly. Also, if there's any issue with your power of attorney authorization, just let us know ahead of time. See you then." I didn't move for a full minute. The buzz of the espresso machine in the background, the shuffle of pages from a college kid at the next table, all of it faded into white noise as that voice repeated in my head. Margie had scheduled another signing using my name. She'd told someone I'd be there with my ID. She'd used the words, "power of attorney," like it was a normal part of our lives, not something she'd forged behind my back and misused while I was standing over my brother's casket. And this woman had no idea she'd just left that message on the one phone that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. I replayed it. Twice. Every word landed heavier the second time. This wasn't over. She wasn't finished. And now she'd crossed into new territory, actively, publicly using paperwork that I never saw, never signed, and never approved. It wasn't just a past betrayal. It was happening again. Which meant it was time to stop watching and start acting. The next morning, I didn't go to the courthouse. I went to a place called Atlantic Coast Title Solutions, a bland little building tucked behind a strip mall near the bypass. The woman from the voicemail worked there. I walked in wearing the blazer I'd bought from the thrift shop, holding a manila folder under one arm like I was there to sign something official. At the front desk, I smiled politely. "Robert Hayes," I said. "I think I'm on the calendar for 10. The receptionist checked the schedule. Her brow creased. "I don't see anything under your name." I leaned in slightly, lowered my voice. "I got a call yesterday confirming a signing with Margie Lowell. Said I'd be bringing my ID for power of attorney validation." The woman's fingers paused over the keyboard. She looked up slowly. "Oh. That Robert." Her tone changed. Cautious now. "Do you have your ID?" I reached into my pocket but didn't pull it out. Just held her gaze. What would have happened if I hadn't shown up? She blinked. "Sir, that signature would have been taken anyway, wouldn't it?" She didn't answer. Just stared. And I gave her nothing else. Just turned and walked out, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my jaw. I'd confirmed enough. She was still using my name. Still relying on the silence and confusion to slide forged documents past distracted clerks. She was playing a game where the goal wasn't just winning, it was erasing me entirely. 2 hours later, I was back at the county registrar's office, pulling title records for properties Margie had been involved in through her boyfriend's firm. The receptionist there gave me a strange look. "Didn't you just come through here a couple months ago?" "Working on a new angle," I said, smiling without meaning it. By late afternoon, I had a list of 3 more transactions where Margie appeared as a signer, either directly or under power of attorney for people who couldn't have legally granted it. One was a woman in assisted living. Another was a man who died 6 weeks before the signature date. And one of them had a forged notary stamp from the same guy who'd signed our house deed. I stared at the paper, the columns of names and dates swimming in front of me. I wasn't just a casualty of her scheme. I might have been the first in a line of victims. That night, I pulled out the piece of porch swing I'd been carving and gouged deeper than usual, dragging the chisel across the grain with a slow, rhythmic pressure. I wasn't carving for comfort anymore. I was channeling heat. The swing had once held our names, intertwined. Now, it was covered in carved dates, initials, fragments of truth. It looked less like a keepsake and more like evidence. I knew I couldn't go much longer without some kind of direct encounter. Fate beat me to it. 3 days later, I walked into the Bank of Savannah branch on Whitaker Street to close out an old joint account that had somehow survived our divorce. I didn't expect her to be there. I certainly didn't expect to walk in and find her already seated with a teller, laughing softly, fingernails tapping the edge of the counter like she owned the place. Our eyes met. She didn't flinch. Just tilted her head. "Well," she said with that lightness she always used in public, "look who finally came up for air." I stood a few feet from her, holding my envelope of documents. "I didn't realize you still used this bank," I said, voice even. She gave a small shrug. "Old habits. I was just handling some things on behalf of a client." Her voice had that practiced warmth, like she wanted everyone nearby to think we were old friends, not ex-spouses split by fraud. I held her gaze. "You always handle things alone these days?" She smiled. "It's easier when people trust you." The teller returned, holding a sheet. Margie turned back to her, ending the conversation without needing to say another word. She didn't look at me again. She didn't have to. Her message was clear. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't see, was that the man she just dismissed wasn't there to close the account. He was there to trigger an internal review. Because tucked inside the envelope I handed the branch manager on my way out was a notarized affidavit requesting full transactional history under my name for the last 12 months. And attached to it was the original power of attorney agreement we'd signed 10 years ago, clearly voided during the divorce. It would take a few days to process. But once it did, I'd know exactly what she'd done, and when. Later that week, Kenny sent me something that lit the fuse under everything. It was a video, sent over text, no caption, just a 30-second clip from a realtor's private event. Margie was in it, wearing a wine-red blazer, laughing with a group near the bar. Someone off camera asked, "Whatever happened to that old guy you used to be married to?" Margie didn't hesitate. "Robert?" She laughed, light and cold. "He's still trying to find his screwdriver. Poor thing never could finish what he started." The group around her laughed. Someone mimed hammering a nail. Someone else added, "Yeah, I remember him. Quiet. Kinda slow." Margie raised her glass. "Let's drink to upgrades." I stared at the video until my phone screen dimmed. Then I set it down slowly, like I was placing something rotten on a table. That clip wasn't just cruel, it was public. She'd gone from deception to mockery, from hidden theft to open dismissal. And it meant one thing: she truly believed I was out of the picture. Good. Because that meant she wasn't watching what I was doing in the background. The next morning, I met with Karen Torres, the attorney I'd contacted weeks earlier. We sat across from each other in her small office, the walls lined with file cabinets and framed degrees. I laid out everything: the forged deeds, the questionable notarizations, the voicemail, the witness statement from Mrs. Daniels, the notary's hesitation. The video. She didn't smile, but her eyebrows rose higher with each new page. By the end of it, she leaned back slowly. "Do you want criminal charges, or just the house?" "I want the truth. And the deed, if possible." Karen nodded. "We'll start with the registrar's public hearing. You've got enough to raise formal dispute. If the notary doesn't show up or can't defend the timeline, it'll trigger a title review. And the forged POA? I'll file to nullify it retroactively. If we win, we can restore the deed under fraud statute and expose every transaction linked to your name." She used your signature to build her castle. We're going to walk through the front door and pull the blueprints. I didn't say anything. Just shook her hand. That night, I stood in the shadows again, this time across from a new open house event Margie was hosting. She stood on the front porch in white slacks, holding a clipboard, smiling like she belonged in a brochure. People mingled, drank wine, took her flyers. She looked untouchable. But what she didn't know, what not a single person at that party knew, was that I had already submitted the chain of title dispute to the Public Land Office. That the documents were already under review. That 3 of the signatures had already been flagged by a forensics consultant. That a hearing date had been set for next month. And that a court summons was quietly on its way to her address with the words, "Fraudulent conveyance allegation," printed in bold on the front. She raised her glass to toast another sale. I watched from across the street, pulled out my phone, and hit send on the final affidavit submission to the county records clerk. Subject line: Request for deed correction, fraud attached. And then I walked away. By the time I walked into the hearing room, Margie was already seated at the front table, flipping through a neat little binder that looked like it had been professionally prepared. Her nails tapped lightly against the laminate. She wore a charcoal blazer and one of those smug, controlled smiles you learn to wear when you think charm still works in rooms full of professionals. I kept my eyes on her as I sat down across the aisle, and she looked up just long enough to offer a polite, slow nod, like I was a mild inconvenience she had already budgeted time to defeat. The county hearing officer, mid-60s, wire-rimmed glasses, a lifetime of bureaucracy in her voice, called the case. She ran through the claim like it was nothing more than a zoning appeal. Disputed conveyance of shared property, alleged forgery, claimant, Robert Hayes. Margie's lawyer, a man who looked like he only practiced law because his tennis career didn't pan out, leaned back with his pen resting lazily between his fingers. I knew they were relaxed because they still believed it would be my word against hers. They had no idea how long I'd been documenting this. The officer motioned to me. "Mr. Hayes, you may present your evidence." I didn't give a speech. I handed over a neatly clipped packet, the original deed with both our signatures, the 2022 forged deed with my name faked, and the forensic report confirming that whoever had signed the newer document hadn't done so with my handwriting. I pointed to the mismatched capital R, the slant on the loop of the Y in Hayes, the inconsistent stroke pressure. The officer didn't blink. She asked if I had anything further. I reached for a second packet, photographs from the notary log, timestamp inconsistencies, and a notarized letter from the bank confirming I hadn't authorized any transaction under Margie's power of attorney. Then came the curveball. Margie's attorney cleared his throat. "If I may, my client would like to make a statement." The officer nodded, and Margie stood. Her voice came out soft, practiced, and laced with a little tremble, the kind people mistake for sincerity. "This has all been deeply upsetting," she began, hands folded neatly. "I know Robert feels wronged. I understand that. But after the divorce, there were conversations, informal, yes, but conversations about him stepping away. About letting me handle things. He was going through grief after his brother passed, and I thought I was doing the responsible thing by finalizing the sale so neither of us would be tied to the house emotionally. I didn't forge anything. I acted under the impression I had residual authority through our previous agreement. If I misunderstood the limits of that, I'm truly sorry." She turned, just slightly, to face me. Her eyes softened. "I never wanted this to get ugly. It was a clever performance. Measured, humble, manipulative. She knew the language of plausible deniability like she knew the back of her hand. But I wasn't here to match her story. I was here to expose it." The hearing officer waited a beat. "Mr. Hayes, do you have proof the power of attorney was revoked?" I handed over the divorce filing, signed, sealed, and court-stamped. Voided 11 months before the sale. Filed directly with the clerk. The officer skimmed the document, her lips pressed into a tight line. For a moment, the room went still. And then the notary curveball hit. Margie's attorney lifted a hand. "We'd like to introduce a statement from the notary in question, Mr. Alfred Keene, who couldn't be present today but submitted this response to Mr. Hayes' claim." He passed the envelope across the table. The officer unfolded it. I leaned forward as she read it silently. Then she read it aloud. "To whom it may concern, I have been a notary in good standing for 22 years. I stand by every document I have signed. To the best of my knowledge, Mr. Hayes was present during the execution of the property transfer. I do not recall any discrepancies at the time. If there were issues, they were not brought to my attention." It was a bland, self-protective statement. Not quite a lie. But not the truth either. I raised my hand. "I have evidence that conflicts directly with that claim." The officer looked at me. "The notary log shows Mr. Keene notarized 5 separate documents that day from different locations across the city. The timestamps make it impossible for him to have been present at my property at the time listed. I've also included metadata from security footage that confirms I was in South Carolina at a funeral during the window in question." I passed her the timeline, stapled together with flight info and a printed eulogy bearing the time stamp and location. She reviewed it slowly, her brows pulling closer. After a long pause, she spoke. "Given the signature inconsistencies, the invalidated power of attorney, and the timeline contradiction from the notary's own records, I am issuing a formal finding of fraudulent conveyance. The title will be restored to Mr. Hayes effective immediately, and the transaction placed under legal review. Further action regarding the notary and co-signed properties may be pursued by the registrar's office." Margie didn't move. Her attorney closed his folder a little too fast. The room was silent except for the sound of my heartbeat, slow, steady, resolved. I didn't gloat. I stood, nodded to the officer, and walked past Margie without looking her way. But as I reached the doorway, I heard her voice, quiet but strained. "You planned this." I turned, not smiling. "I documented it. And then I left." Outside, 2 local real estate bloggers and 1 freelance reporter were waiting with cameras. Margie had planned for the hearing to be quiet. She didn't know I'd anonymously tipped off a journalist who'd been burned by a similar forged transaction years earlier. As I crossed the sidewalk, I heard someone ask Margie a question as she exited the building. "Do you have anything to say about the title fraud?" She turned sharply, eyes wide, lips parted in a frozen smile that didn't reach her eyes. She blinked like a deer caught in high beams. Her attorney stepped between her and the camera, muttering something I didn't hear. But the image was already caught, the stunned face, the silence, the start of a real-world consequence. That was all I needed. Over the next 6 weeks, the fallout came fast. The notary's license was suspended pending full investigation. A second fraudulent sale tied to Margie's boyfriend's firm surfaced. Her name was scrubbed from 2 listings and removed from the agency's website. The woman who'd once been the face of New Beginnings in local real estate was suddenly hard to find. I didn't try to track her. I didn't have to. One day, Kenny sent me a blurry photo from across town. It showed Margie standing outside a small closing office, this time in a strip mall, no signage on the windows, holding a cardboard box. She wasn't dressed up. She wasn't smiling. Underneath the photo, Kenny just wrote, "Found her." I didn't reply. Instead, I drove to the house. The deed had come in the day before, officially refiled, cleaned of her name. The home I'd built with my hands, defended with my patience, and reclaimed with nothing but truth and time. I walked through the living room, bare now, walls echoing with quiet. Then out to the back porch. The old swing was gone. I brought the new one with me, pine, sturdy, handmade, and mounted it in silence. As I worked, I caught sight of the initials I'd carved beneath the seat. She buried the truth. I dug it back up. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt right. That was enough. Weeks later, I passed by a real estate office downtown, the one where Margie had posed for her magazine photos. Her name was still scratched from the glass, but someone had taped a flyer to the inside of the door. It showed her replacement, a younger woman, smiling wide. Margie had been replaced cleanly, quietly, just like she once tried to replace me. I stood there a long moment, then turned and walked away. Back at the house, I sat on the swing and watched the light shift across the porch floorboards. I thought about the years I'd lost. The lies I hadn't seen. The calm it had taken to outlast her. And then I reached into my pocket and unfolded the original photo of our deed, the one I'd taken before any of this began. There was my signature. Honest. Crooked. Real. She had tried to sell me out of my own life. She thought the paper was stronger than the person. She thought I'd go quietly. She thought I'd vanish. But the thing about carpenters is, we don't vanish. We build. And when you tear down what we made, we don't just rebuild it. We build it better.